There is no relationship in modern geopolitics quite like the one between the United States and Israel. Over decades, the United States has provided Israel with more foreign aid than any other country in history, offered diplomatic protection on the global stage, and supported it through wars, crises, and shifting political eras. To some, it is America's most vital alliance. To others, it is its most costly and unconditional commitment. But this relationship did not emerge fully formed. It was built step by step, shaped by war, ideology, politics, and power. It begins on May 14, 1948. In Tel Aviv, David Ben-Gurion declares the creation of the State of Israel as the British mandate over Palestine expires. Just minutes later, the United States, led by Harry S. Truman, becomes the first country in the world to recognize the new state. And that decision, often remembered as swift and decisive, was in reality the result of intense internal conflict. Truman's own Secretary of State, George Marshall, strongly opposed recognition, warning it could alienate the Arab world, threaten access to vital oil resources, and create an opening for Soviet influence. Truman moved forward anyway, driven by a mix of personal conviction, political calculation, and moral urgency in the aftermath of the Holocaust. But the birth of Israel was not experienced the same way by everyone. For Palestinians, it marked the beginning of what they call the Nakba, or catastrophe. Around 750,000 Palestinians were displaced from their homes during the war that followed Israel's declaration of independence. Hundreds of towns and villages were depopulated or destroyed. And this dual reality, celebration for one people, displacement for another, would shape the conflict and America's role in it for decades to come. In the early years, the U.S.-Israel relationship was far from unconditional. In 1956, during the Suez Crisis, Israel joined Britain and France in a coordinated invasion of Egypt after Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. The United States, under President Dwight D. Eisenhower, was furious at being excluded from the plan and forced all three countries to withdraw. This was not yet a relationship defined by automatic support. At the time, America's priority in the region was not Israel. It was containing Soviet influence and maintaining ties with Arab nations. That balance began to shift dramatically in June 1967 during the Six-Day War. Surrounded by hostile neighbors and facing escalating tensions, Israel launched a preemptive strike against Egypt and quickly defeated the combined forces of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. In just 6 days, Israel captured the Sinai Peninsula, Gaza Strip, West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Golan Heights. The victory was decisive and reshaped the region overnight. For the United States, the implications were clear. Israel had demonstrated extraordinary military capability, defeating Soviet-backed Arab armies without direct American involvement. In the context of the Cold War, this transformed Israel from a diplomatic complication into a strategic asset. The alliance deepened rapidly. That transformation was cemented during the Yom Kippur War in October 1973. Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel, catching it off guard and inflicting heavy losses. As the situation grew dire, Israel signaled that it might resort to nuclear options. The United States, led by Richard Nixon and advised by Henry Kissinger, responded with a massive airlift of military supplies. The resupply effort helped Israel recover and ultimately turn the tide of the war. But this support came at a cost. In response, Arab oil-producing nations imposed an oil embargo on the United States, triggering a global energy crisis. Fuel prices soared, and the American economy was shaken. From that moment on, U.S. support for Israel was no longer just a strategic decision. It carried direct economic consequences at home. In the aftermath of the war, Kissinger pursued an ambitious diplomatic effort to stabilize the region. His work laid the groundwork for one of the most significant breakthroughs in Middle Eastern history. In 1977, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat made a historic visit to Jerusalem, signaling a willingness to make peace. The following year, U.S. President Jimmy Carter brought Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin together at Camp David. After intense negotiations, they signed the Camp David Accords, leading to the first peace treaty between Israel and an Arab nation. Yet even this breakthrough contained unresolved tensions. The accords included promises of Palestinian self-governance, but those promises were never fully realized. The Palestinian question remained at the center of the conflict, unresolved and increasingly volatile. During the 1980s, under President Ronald Reagan, the U.S.-Israel relationship evolved into a formal strategic partnership. Military cooperation expanded, intelligence sharing increased, and Israel became deeply integrated into America's regional strategy. Even moments of tension, such as Israel's 1982 invasion of Lebanon and the Sabra and Shatila massacre, did not fundamentally weaken the alliance. Instead, the instability of the region reinforced the perception in Washington that Israel was a necessary and reliable partner. By the late 1980s, the alliance had taken on a life of its own. It was no longer driven solely by Cold War strategy. A powerful political infrastructure had developed within the United States. Organizations like American Israel Public Affairs Committee built deep relationships in Congress. While millions of evangelical Christian voters supported Israel for religious reasons tied to biblical interpretations, these forces ensured that support for Israel remained strong regardless of changing geopolitical conditions. When the Cold War ended in 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union, many expected the relationship to weaken. Instead, it grew even stronger. The strategic rationale had changed, but the political and ideological foundations were now firmly in place. There was one moment, however, when a different path seemed possible. In 1993, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat shook hands at the White House, marking the signing of the Oslo Accords. The agreement offered hope for a two-state solution, surely with Palestinians gaining limited self-governance and negotiations planned for a final settlement. But that hope gradually unraveled. Violence, political opposition, and mutual distrust undermined the process. Rabin was assassinated in 1995. Settlement expansion continued. Negotiations stalled. By the time the Second Intifada erupted in 2000, marked by widespread violence and suicide bombings, the peace process had effectively collapsed. By the dawn of the 21st century, the U.S.-Israel alliance was stronger than ever, but the path to peace between Israelis and Palestinians had all but disappeared. The Cold War was over, but in its place stood a powerful combination of political influence, religious conviction, and unresolved conflict. Then came September 11th, 2001, a moment that would reshape global politics and further solidify the alliance in ways that would define the decades to come. By the time the Cold War ended in 1991, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, many expected the U.S.-Israel relationship to weaken. For decades, the alliance had been justified by a clear strategic logic. Israel was a reliable partner against Soviet influence in the Middle East. But when that rivalry disappeared, something unexpected happened. The relationship didn't fade, it deepened. The money increased, the diplomatic protection continued, and the political structure supporting the alliance became stronger than ever. To understand why, you have to look beyond the Cold War. Because what sustained the alliance after 1991 wasn't a single factor. It was a system built on political lobbying, a religious conviction, and a peace process that collapsed without resolution. By the time the 21st century began, that system was so deeply embedded that no single event, not even the worst terrorist attack in modern history, could break it. One of the earliest signs of this system forming can be traced back to 1953, when a young Israeli officer, Ariel Sharon, led a military unit into the West Bank village of Kibbutz, killing dozens of civilians in retaliation for an earlier attack. The international backlash was immediate, and even the United States condemned the operation. But in Washington, a lobbyist named Isaiah Kinnan saw something deeper. He recognized that Israel needed a permanent, organized political presence in the United States, one that could protect the relationship in moments of crisis. In 1954, he founded what would eventually become the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, or AIPAC. At first, it was small and relatively unnoticed, but over the following decades, especially after the Yom Kippur War, it grew into one of the most influential lobbying organizations in Washington. Its strength didn't come from direct donations at first, but from coordination, connecting donors, signaling political support, and building relationships across Congress. By the late 20th century, AIPAC had become a central hub in American politics, and in 2021, it formally entered the world of campaign finance by creating its own political action committee and super PAC. By the 2023 to 2024 election cycle, it had spent over $100 million supporting candidates across hundreds of races. The scale was unprecedented. A majority of sitting members of Congress had received support connected to its network. Whether that support changes votes or reinforces existing positions is debated, But what's not disputed is that it raises the political cost of opposing the alliance to an extraordinary level. At the same time, another powerful force was shaping American support for Israel, one that had nothing to do with traditional geopolitics. The largest organized constituency backing Israel in the United States today is not the Jewish community. It is evangelical Christians. Organizations like Christians United for Israel, founded by John Hagee, have mobilized millions of voters around a deeply held religious belief. For many within this movement, support for Israel is not simply political, it is theological. It is rooted in a belief system known as dispensationalism, which interprets the return of the Jewish people to Israel and control over Jerusalem as part of a divine plan leading to the second coming of Christ. This belief gained political power in the late 20th century through figures like Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson, who helped bring evangelical Christians into organized political life. By the time of Ronald Reagan, this alliance between religious voters and pro-Israel policy was firmly established. Today, evangelical voters make up a crucial part of the American electorate, especially within the Republican Party, and their support for Israel remains one of the most consistent and influential forces in U.S. politics. But even with political and religious backing, there was still a moment when a different future seemed possible. In 1993, on the lawn of the White House, Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat shook hands as the Oslo Accords were signed. For the first time, both sides formally recognized each other. The agreement laid out a path toward a two-state solution and raised hopes that decades of conflict might finally come to an end. But those hopes slowly unraveled. Settlement expansion continued. Violence persisted. Trust eroded. Rabin was assassinated in 1995. Negotiations stalled. And in 2000, after failed talks and rising tensions, the Second Intifada erupted. Suicide bombings, military responses, and widespread violence shattered what remained of the peace process. By the time the uprising subsided, the possibility of a negotiated solution had been pushed further away than ever. So by the time the world entered the 21st century, the foundation was already set. The Cold War rationale had disappeared, but it had been replaced by something far more durable, a network of political influence, religious conviction, and unresolved conflict. Then came September 11, 2001. The attacks carried out by al-Qaeda killed nearly 3,000 people and transformed American foreign policy overnight. In the aftermath, Ariel Sharon reframed Israel's conflict with groups like Hamas and Hezbollah as part of the same global struggle the United States now faced. The message was simple and powerful. Israel and America were fighting the same enemy. That framing found support within the administration of George W. Bush, particularly among a group of policymakers known as neoconservatives. Figures like Paul Wolfowitz and Douglas Feith argued that threats in the Middle East, especially from countries like Iraq and Iran, affected both American and Israeli security. Their ideas helped shape the broader war on terror, including the 2003 invasion of Iraq. While the causes of that war remain debated, what followed is clearer. The idea that U.S. and Israeli security interests were fundamentally aligned became deeply embedded in American policy. The alliance was no longer just about strategy or politics. It was about a shared perception of threat. At the same time, the financial dimension of the relationship continued to grow. Over the decades, the United States has provided Israel with hundreds of billions of dollars in assistance, making it the largest recipient of U.S. foreign aid in history. Under Barack Obama, that support reached new levels with a $38 billion military aid agreement, the largest of its kind. What makes this remarkable is that even during periods of tension, such as Obama's difficult relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu, the support never stopped. Disagreements over settlements, diplomacy, and Iran did not alter the fundamental structure of the alliance. The system continued to operate regardless of personal or political conflict. Under Donald Trump, the relationship entered a new phase. Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, moved the U.S. embassy there, and brokered the Abraham Accords, normalizing relations between Israel and several Arab states. These agreements reshaped regional politics, but they did so without resolving the Palestinian question. By 2023, the region was already tense. Then on October 7th, Hamas launched a large-scale attack on Israel, killing over 1,000 people and taking hundreds hostage. It was the deadliest day for Jewish people since the Holocaust. Israel responded with a massive military campaign in Gaza, and the United States responded just as quickly. with full political, military, and diplomatic support. In that moment, every layer of the alliance activated at once. The military cooperation, the lobbying networks, the religious backing, the post-9/11 security framework, all of it moved in the same direction. The response was immediate and overwhelming, and that is the clearest answer to the question this entire series has been asking. Why does America back Israel? Because the alliance is not built on one reason. It is built on many, on history, on strategy, on politics, on religion, and on decades of decisions that reinforced each other over time. It has been constructed carefully, layer by layer, over more than 75 years. At the same time, millions of Palestinians have lived through this entire history without a state, without full political rights, and without a consistent voice in the decisions shaping their future. That reality remains one of the central unresolved issues of the modern world. Whether any of this will change is still an open question. Public opinion is shifting. Political divisions are growing. The region itself continues to evolve. But history moves slowly, and systems this deeply rooted are not easily undone. What we can say with certainty is this: the U.S.-Israel alliance did not happen by accident. It was built deliberately through war and diplomacy, through ideology and influence, through moments of crisis and moments of opportunity. Understanding how it was built is the first step to understanding where it might go next. If you've made it this far in the series, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next.